Hello, my name is Cassie, and in today's video we're going to be doing another free amigurumi pattern review. However, this one's going to be a little bit different because this video features only patterns that Instagram followers of mine have suggested to me, but they are specifically my followers' patterns. So how I'm gonna do this a little bit differently is if there's anything that I run into that I would recommend be changed in the pattern, I'm going to offer very specific feedback of what you can be doing to change those patterns and what you can be doing to make those patterns look a little bit better and allow people to want to make them more. And yeah, with that being said, let's just go ahead and get started. I use 3 criteria when rating patterns, and the first criteria is, would I use the pattern again to make another plushie? This really comes down to if it's easy to understand, if it is easy for a beginner or an advanced crocheter to use, and so forth. Number 2 is, can I understand the pattern easily? This kind of ties into number 1 as well, because you want your pattern to be easy to understand, have thorough instructions so you're not left questioning anything, doesn't leave you confused or wondering how you got the wrong stitch number, things like that at the end of the row. Patterns like this also typically have like lots of pictures throughout the step-by-step process to kind of guide you through how it's supposed to look like as you make it. And there's also sometimes diagrams about how to attach things or sew things and so on and so forth. And then number 3 is, do I like the final product? And this really comes down to if it turns out to be one of those expectations versus reality cases where the picture that the pattern author provides on the pattern itself looks a certain way, but when you finish the project, it looks completely different. We really don't want that to happen, and so that is why number 3 is really important. We want our plushies to look cute and exactly the way that they are supposed to look by the pattern designer, so that when you come back to that pattern later, you're not thinking, oh, what was this pattern that I used to make this plushie, but I can't figure it out because it doesn't look the same as the pattern picture. So the first pattern that I reviewed for this video was Bartholomew the Chicken by Shiny Crochet Stuff. The first thing you'll notice once this screenshot of the pattern appears on screen is that how it turns out looks nothing like that picture that is on her front slide. However, when you go to the second slide, which shows the pattern tester photos, it looks a little bit closer to what this looks like. So this kind of made me think that maybe the first photo that the pattern author provided is like from maybe like initial stages of actually creating the pattern or something like that, because it doesn't look like this at all. I know she doesn't use safety eyes, which is one difference, but I feel like it looks significantly different than her photo still. For example, my chicken looks a lot longer than her chicken. Her chicken kind of looks like a squished little like marshmallow size, where mine is like a little bit taller. Another thing that I noticed was that the pattern testers, not only did they look more like mine, but one of them had feet and wings, like little bobble stitches for those. And secondly was that one of the follower patterns, it looked like their comb was like a little bit scalloped on top, and I actually liked that a little bit better. This is just a rectangle that you make. It's like 3 rows of single crochets or something like that, or maybe it's a chain, single crochet, single crochet. So 2 rows of single crochets on a chain, and then you sew that to the top. What I would recommend is that the second row of single crochets, so row 3 in the comb, would be more of a scalloped design, so it kind of like curves in and up and in and up. It would look a little bit more like a actual chicken comb. I like that it kind of leans over when it's attached to the chicken. That is very reminiscent of what my chickens look like. However, so I want to show you guys what I did to improve this pattern, and Shiny Crochet Stuff, feel free to steal this if you want to put out a new version of your pattern with newer photos that are more representative of your pattern, and also if you want it to look like how your how your pattern tester made it with the wings and feet. So that is how I changed it a little. Pardon the gapping up here. I had to change yarns It's a different yarn brand up top than it is on the bottom. This is like Parfait Chunky, and then this is like a chenille velvet yarn that I got off Amazon one time. So there is a little bit of gapping because of that. It's kind of not a 100% similar yarn weight. Anyway, we've got feet bobbles on this guy, and we've got wing bobbles, and as well as the comb is a little bit scalloped at the top, as you can see, instead of being like that straight rectangle. The way that I achieved that was for the feet, I just added some bobbles in row 5. So what I did was single crochet 4, bobble in your feet color, single crochet 4 in your body color, and then bobble again in your feet color, and then single crochet 6 to finish off the row. So that is what you would do instead of what she has the instructions for row 5 if you wanted those feet bobbles included. To add the wings, I added my wings in row 8. What I did was I single crocheted 2, and then I made a bobble, single crochet 9, add a bobble, and then single crochet 3. The stitch count for both of these amended rows is the same. I just substitute a bobble stitch instead of a single crochet in the places where I added those bobble stitches. To amend that comb, so it's not just a rectangle and it has that scalloped edge at the top, I would recommend you change row 3 to chain 1, single crochet 1, slip stitch, single crochet 1, and then a slip stitch to end the row. And you put those slip stitches in individual stitches and not combine. Everything should be in its own stitch is what I'm trying to say. So other than that, I noticed a lot of grammar and spelling typo issues, and I was wondering why that was occurring because it was pattern tested by at least 2 other people, maybe 3, and those notes weren't adjusted so that those typos weren't there. So I'm not sure why that was. Another thing that I noticed was when you're placing the eyes, it doesn't tell you how many stitches are in between the eyes. So if you want to make sure that people don't get frustrated at that point in the pattern and have to flip back to the front page, I know that's not a huge deal to some people, but having that stitch number in between the eyes as a reference is really helpful for placing the eyes so that you don't have to flip back and forth. And even what I do in my patterns is when I place the eyes, I have a picture of where the eyes are placed. I always include what row they are placed between and then how many stitches are in between the eyes, but I also include that photo just in case people need a visual reference, because I know I do in a lot of cases. So that is why I recommend that you include that in the pattern. My last big note was that the sewing instructions and embroidery instructions were really vague. I wish there were some more words describing how or where to sew those parts on, and even better to have a photo to accompany that instruction so that people know exactly where they're placing the elements that you have to sew or embroider on. Overall, I think the pattern is really cute. I just worry that a lot of people would be turned away by the initial photo of the pattern because it looks like somebody who wasn't super experienced in amigurumi might have made that photo, might have made the plushie that's in that photo. And so that's why I really recommend that the pattern designer re-releases this pattern with better photos, a little bit of amendments if they want to include the bobbles for the feet and the wings, if they want to make that an option, as well as, you know, just correcting some of those typos in there, maybe adding a few more photos in the pattern, because from what I remember, the pattern was kind of short, so there weren't a lot of pages to it, so she could definitely stretch out those instructions into different pages and then just add photos alongside those instructions so that people making the pattern for the first time will actually know what you're supposed to be doing and what it's supposed to look like alongside those instructions. And shiny crochet stuff, I would be really happy to help you with that. If you want to recruit me to kind of help test the pattern, if you want to re-release it, I would be happy to help you try to figure out how to do some of those things. If you want to rewrite it and then send me a copy, I can kind of proofread it and make sure it looks good. Give you recommendations on how to take better photos if you want even. I would be extremely happy to help. I really just want your pattern to come across as cute as it actually is, and I just think it needs a little bit of an elevation to get it there. So overall, I would give this pattern 3 out of 5 stars. It needs a little work, and I definitely recommend a rewrite, and I would be happy to help you with that rewrite if you would like me to. Alright, so next up we have Apollo the Dragon by Crochet by Brittany, and this is a really cute pattern that gives you everything you need to make these little dragons. What I really liked about the pattern was you work the body and the head together as one piece, and then everything else is a piece that you make separately. So it kind of eliminates some of the need to, you know, make extra pieces like sewing on a head to a body separately. Instead, it's just all one piece. And then for everything else, it's kind of just make it all as you go, sew the pieces on as you go. The scalloped spine back here is crocheted directly into the body, so that isn't an issue at all. And then everything else is just kind of sewed on separately. I only have 2 real notes about this pattern. The first one would be that the instructions on how to sew your wings onto your body don't really tell you how to secure it so that they don't flop over like this. I can see some kiddos, like if somebody bought this from me, might like the fact that the wings are floppy like this because it kind of looks like he's like flying if you wag him around. However, if he's just like kind of sitting up on a bookshelf or something like that, I can see the floppy wing aspect kind of being you know, a little bit weird, especially if just, you know, somebody bumps a wall or something and then one of the wings flops over, just because, like, for example, this orange and pink one that I made, this wing really wants to flop over. And what I really tried to do is you sew the wings onto the middle portion of the back here. That's where you secure them, and then it just says to secure them on another point of the body, I think is what it says in the instructions. But what I ended up doing is I just sewed part of the wing to the hand. I would recommend, if you want your wings to stay secure on these guys, that you maybe also sew the top of the wing, this point here, to the head so that it doesn't move around as much if you don't want them to move around. But I like the flappy wing aspect too, it's kind of cute. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the way that I did the spikes for the spine on this one is different than it is written in the pattern. I couldn't quite figure out what stitches were supposed to be made into the same stitch, and so what I did was I just did 1 single crochet and 1 treble crochet in the same stitch, and I skipped the slip stitch altogether. She tells you to single crochet, treble crochet, and then slip stitch, and I wasn't really sure if that was all made in the same stitch or not. So what I ended up doing was I just did a single crochet and a treble crochet, and then I went to the next stitch and did a single crochet, treble crochet all the way down to the bottom, and then when I got to the last stitch that I wanted a spike in, I just slip stitched and fastened off. So that is what I did differently. I know in her pattern there are 2 different kinds of spine spikes. You can have the more scalloped looking ones, or I think there was like a straight spine down the back. So there's 2 different options there. I only tried the scalloped looking one, but I did read over the instructions for the first option, which is the one I didn't do, and it looked like it made sense. I just didn't like what that looked like as much as I do with the kind of scalloped looking one. Overall, I think it's a really cute pattern. It is a lot of parts, so if that's not something that you're comfortable with working with, it might not be a pattern that you want to use, but there are some no-sew aspects to it that make it a little bit quicker to work through. Typically, this isn't my kind of cup of tea because of the amount of things you have to sew together to make it, but I do really like how it turns out. I like having these little dragons, and I think people at my markets will really enjoy them as well. I think they'll be really recognizable. Like, for example, I made this one kind of to look like Spyro, and then this one I just ended up picking some random colors that looked good together, and I think both of them are just super adorable and people will really like them. I will admit that making this first one that I made, I was just like really burnt out at the end after all the sewing involved, but making the second one, it was kind of like a Zen experience. I felt like I was being I was meditating or something because I knew what to expect at that point. I do dread a lot sewing on pieces, but I did really enjoy this pattern and I think it looks really, really cute when it comes out. So it is worth the time that you put into it to make these things. And these are one of the, I think I could sell these for a higher ticket price, so maybe around like the $50 to $60 range for the amount of work that I put in, as well as like the amount of value that comes out of this. People really like dragons, and so that is why I like this pattern, and I would rate it 4 stars out of 5. The next pattern that I reviewed is Harley the Hippo by Hales Crochet 2020, and this is actually the first hippo that I've ever come across as an amigurumi pattern, and I really like how it turned out. When I initially looked at the photos, I thought maybe a hippo isn't that tall, but you know, kind of pondering it a little more and seeing photos of actual hippos, like that is actually, they are humongous animals and they are pretty tall. So yeah, I made this guy in 2 different colors. We've got this you know, ocean blue color, and then we've got this silvery gray one. And how this pattern is worked up is you make the legs separately from the body, and then the body is from the head to the back, all one piece. So the bobble, the ears are bobbles, so are the nostrils, and this tail back here is a bobble as well. One of the parts of the pattern that I kind of left out that I ended up not including was that I think I just like dropped the last row or 2 entirely because it just didn't need it. I think this tail bobble is pretty obvious, so I don't think I needed to add another bobble like it says in the pattern for the very last row. You're supposed to add another bobble, but I was worried it would look a little weird. It might look like a puckering like little face on the back of the hippo, so that is why I ended up skipping that row entirely. One of the first things that I noticed about the pattern was on the first page of the actual written instructions. It has like a little doodle of a hippo. It's where you're creating the legs. There's a little arrow that points to the legs on that doodle. Although it's cute, I would actually recommend that instead of doing that, you just add a photo of what those legs are supposed to look like. And the way that that pattern page is set up is the instructions are split up into 2 columns, and there's space on either side of those columns where you could place a picture of what each of those legs are supposed to look like. And really the pattern is the same, other than one of the sets of legs, the back or the front, I can't remember, is just a little bit shorter. It's like 1 row shorter than the other set of legs. So I would just recommend that you take off that little doodle of the hippo, or maybe make it smaller and just put it someplace a little less significant on the page, and just add some photos of what those are supposed to look like in that area instead. Next note that I have is that there is not any instruction about how many stitches should be in between your eyes when you place them, so I had to again refer back to the front page photo to place where my eyes are. So as you can see on each of these, I think I have 3 or 4 stitches visible between my eyes. I think this one has them a little closer and this one is a little farther apart, and that is just because there isn't a instruction on how many visible stitches are in between the eyes. So we've got 2 different options here. Definitely comment down below which one you prefer more, if you like the eyes farther apart or closer together. I think they're both equally as cute. I actually also want to show you guys the eyes on these. I've got some sparkly safety eyes on them. So on the blue one, we've got sparkly silver, and then on this silver one, we've got sparkly blue, and they're both so cute. And then like I was saying earlier, I don't know why there's an extra bobble stitch in row 30. I ended up just opting to not do row 30 entirely, and instead I just closed off at that point. In row 29, it's like a row of complete decreases all the way around, but then row 30, it was a bobble stitch and then single crochets, and I just thought that would look a little weird. It might look like it's puckering a little, and so that is why I opted just not to use row 30 at all. My last note is that it doesn't really tell you how many stitches should be in between the legs when you sew them on, so as you can see, I kind of just had to eyeball it and make sure that they stood up when I set them on a table, so that if my placement was wrong, it would be more obvious because it wouldn't be able to stand up straight like these. So definitely when you're placing your legs on your hippos, make sure you're just testing out the placement before you actually sew them on so they don't look a little wonky. That is something else that I would recommend including in the instructions, is saying something along the lines of, if you have knitting needles or if you have amigurumi needles, just make sure that you place them in the hippos before you sew them on so that the placement makes sense and that they're not lopsided or can't stand up correctly. So yeah, with that said, I would give this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. It's really cute and I really like these hippos. The next pattern that I tested is the Loaf Cat by Jazz Crochet 11, and this is another case of that it kind of feels like you're being catfished kind of thing, but you know, like the opposite way, where it turns out looking better than it does in her photos. I'm not completely sure why her photos look so differently. Even her pattern tester photo looks more like mine than it does like hers. Hers, it looks like the face is a lot more flat than this is. I'm not sure if it's because she used a much bigger crochet hook than she should have been using, or if her tension was just really loose or something. I am not sure at all. But this is what the face turns out looking like if you're using like a pretty decent crochet hook size. So I use a 6mm hook with this yarn. And then with like Premier Parfait, if you were using Premier Parfait, I would recommend using like a 4mm hook or a 5mm hook, somewhere around there. And that will get you to the point where you don't have gaps in your stitches and you're gauging your stuff correctly so that it turns out like it's supposed to. So as you can see on both of my Loaf Cats, they have more of like a pointed snout than it does in her photos. I'm not really sure what the issue was there. I wasn't able to check what her hook size was or anything like that because there's not a page with the materials that she used, nor is there a page with like the abbreviations that she uses and what those abbreviations mean. I bring that up because the abbreviations that she uses in the pattern aren't like standard abbreviations that people use. I think for like increase, she used INCR instead of just INC. And I thought that was a little weird, and that's why I made sure that I checked if there was an abbreviations page. So I don't know if that stitch is supposed to be different from what I'm used to an increase being. So that's why I would recommend including that abbreviations page of the pattern. There are definitely enough pages left over in the Instagram post to be able to include those abbreviations. The next thing that I noticed was that there are color changes on one of her Loaf Cats, maybe both of the Loaf Cats that she has, but she doesn't notate those in the pattern. So what I did for this Loaf Cat is just the first 2 rows I made in the white, and then I transitioned to the body color, and that is why I have this little white nose on mine. I kind of just figured out where I wanted to place that color change. It looks like on hers, she might have just done the first row in that white color before transitioning to the body color. So yeah, whenever I see color changes that aren't notated in a pattern, I would always recommend that if you want other people to know how to make those color changes, just to add like a variation page or something like that, or maybe a separate line in the instructions that say, if you want this to be such and such color or not all one color or whatever, do it this way instead. And that would make it so that your pattern is more accessible to all people. Another thing that I wish the pattern talked about was where you're starting in the pattern. I didn't notice where we were starting until the very end of the pattern, where it tells you, you know, you can put a safety nose in the magic ring of the plushie if you want to add a safety nose. And I would really recommend having that note a little bit higher in the pattern so that people know that you're starting at the head instead of like the back of the body, because I was a little worried that I was just, you know, I didn't know where I was supposed to place my safety eyes, and the safety nose until like way later on in the pattern than I would have normally placed those things. And it's just helpful to know what side you're starting on if you're wanting to improvise some of those color changes as well. Another thing that I noticed was there isn't an instruction to stuff the body at any point in time in the pattern, so I would definitely recommend that the author add that note somewhere as well. And then the last thing that I noticed was that you really don't need row 20. I feel like once you get to row 19, the hole is already small enough in the back that you can just sew it closed and not have any issue. This is something that I've run into in the past when I was working up my own patterns too. I figured out that you don't need like a super small hole to sew your amigurumi shut. In fact, if your hole is smaller and you're adding another row, it might make that pucker thing happen, like I was talking about with the hippo, where the back won't lay as flat as you want it to, and you might need to like push it in like this so that it can sit up properly. I know, for example, with my first pattern, my baby broccoli boy, I was experiencing some of that puckering issue, and so when it sat like on a flat surface, it didn't really want to stand up straight. And that is easily remedied by just eliminating one of those end rows so that you get a more flat back. That being said, I really like how the pattern turns out looking like. It's really cute, and I think the pattern designer did a good job of making a really cute pattern. However, those photos at the beginning of the pattern really scare you away because it kind of just doesn't look very professional, and it doesn't look like what it's supposed to come out looking like at the end of the pattern. So Jazz Crochet 11, if you want to rewrite this pattern and you want my help, want me to proofread, test the pattern for you, anything like that, so that it looks a little better and then you want to re-release it, I would happily help you do that if you really want to, and I would really recommend you do that so that people know what your pattern is supposed to look like and you get more clicks on it. And for both of these patterns that I recommended changes on and offered my help on, I would definitely go ahead and share that pattern for you once it comes out, if you go ahead and choose to rewrite the pattern so that it looks a little better and a little bit more professional. So definitely reach out to me if that is of interest to you, and I will look forward to hearing from you. Next up, we have the Mini Monster. This is a pattern by Sophie A. Amigurumi, so it's like Sophia Amigurumi. It's kind of cool username. Anyway, these are really cute little monsters. I think they'll do really well around this time of year. All the fall markets coming up that I have, having like little Halloween looking sea monster looking guys. Of course, they only look like sea monsters because of the colors that I chose, but they are so cute. I especially love the instruction to make these little baubles and then put the safety eyes inside of those baubles. It's really unique and really cute. It kind of reminds me of the Leggy Froggy pattern. That's how you create those little bumps. You make a bauble and then you place your safety eyes in them, so that's really cute. I wish that in the materials section it told you how many colors you will need for the pattern. Of course, that's always up to you how many colors you want to use. But I think for her pattern, she uses like 2 colors total, but it's a little, you know, just upon the first glance of that front page, you have 2 different monsters there, with different color arrangements. So it kind of looks like there's just so many colors to choose from and so many different colored pieces. So for this guy, I just did 2 colors, for his little spiny bits and his mouth, and then the body, and then the eye bauble I made white just because I knew it was going to be an eye. And then for this guy, I ended up making the spikes in one color, and then like the eye baubles in his mouth in another color, and the body color obviously in a different color. So this guy's got 3 colors and this guy's got 2 colors. I think they are really awesome. The eye spikes are really cool, and so is the spine spike, and I think you could also make more spikes if you really wanted to kind of add them wherever you wanted on the plushie, if you really want every single one to be super unique. When I was working on the pattern, one of the first things that I noticed was that the baubles for where your eyes go, it doesn't tell you that you can change those to a different color, or it recommends that you change those to a different color until way down later in the pattern when you actually place your safety eyes, I think. So I thought that was a little weird. So definitely, if I was writing the pattern, I would have that instruction way higher in the pattern, maybe closer to where you place those safety eyes, so that people know, you want those to maybe be a different color because it'll be an eye. And then for row 12, that is where you're supposed to put your little bobble stitches for your guy's legs, and they just didn't line up properly for me. So what I ended up doing was I just took 4 stitch markers and I just put those stitch markers where I wanted my bobble stitches to fall. So that's why mine look a little bit different. There's not like an equal amount of stitches in between each one. I think in between the front legs and the back legs, there are definitely more stitches in between those than there are in between each front leg and each back leg. So I would definitely recommend, if you're rewriting the pattern, you don't necessarily have to because it still works up fine, that you include that instruction that just mark where you think your bobbles should be and then place those bobbles, and maybe also give the instruction that there should be 2 on the front aligned with the eyes, and then 2 on the back aligned with the front legs if you're holding it upside down. So maybe that would be helpful if you were to rewrite the pattern, but I don't think it's necessarily needed, especially since there was a note in the pattern about tension maybe affecting your bobble stitches placement. Next thing that I noticed was the surface stitch instructions for the mouth were a little bit weird to me, specifically because of the pictures that she has. She places her hook vertically through a stitch instead of horizontally. Typically when I do a surface stitch, I do it horizontally so that you can only see the very surface stitch part of the yarn. If you do it horizontally, you might have 2 lines. There will be like the initial surface stitch line, and then there will be a much thinner line where your yarn is wrapping around the stitches that you're crocheting into. So that is why I was a little thrown off by the pictures showing that she inserted her hook in there vertically instead of horizontally. And then finally for the spikes, I have one note about that area of the pattern, and it's just that it's a little confusing. Not the instructions being confusing, but the number of spikes that you need is confusing. So for example, when I made this first little guy, I ended up making 2 of these, which is not actually the right amount of spikes on either of them. And then I made 2 more with the correct amount of spikes, and that's why this guy has blue spikes, and then I made the back spike. The reason that this is confusing is at the top of the spikes instructions, it tells you that you'll need like so and so amount of parts. I didn't really pay attention to that. Instead, I just started making the thing in the instructions. So initially I just made the 2 spikes because that's what it says to do in the instructions, but below that it says to make 2 eyebrow spikes, which is these things. That's what they're actually supposed to look like. They're supposed to have 3 spikes on them, but it tells you to repeat row 2 another time so that you have 3 spikes total. And then for the back, it says underneath the eyebrow spikes to make the back piece, and that is supposed to have 5 spikes total, so you repeat row 2 3 times. So that is why it's a little confusing. It's because the initial instructions, you see that and you're like, okay, I'm gonna make that. And if you're like me, I kind of just disregarded the note on top of that about making 2 eye spikes and 1 back spike, so 3 pieces total. It's not a huge deal if you make extra parts. You can also always just sew extra spikes on your little guy if you really want to. But it was a little confusing because of the instructions being like, this is the base part of the pattern and you're just supposed to repeat row 2 for how many spikes you need. And I think if I was writing the pattern, I would make the instruction in that area to be row 1 and row 2 and then row 3, since you're repeating it for that 3rd spike of the eye, and then have the separate note that says you will have 5 spikes on your back spikes instead of 3, and so you should repeat it 2 more times instead of, however many you would be repeating it if it was just row 1 and row 2. So anyway, this was a really cute make. It works up really quickly, and I would give this pattern 4 stars out of 5. Last pattern that I reviewed for this video is this Oscar the Opossum pattern by Scarlet Garden Crochet. and it's a really cute pattern, makes these really dainty little opossums, and they're also a little bit customizable because it notes in the pattern that you can add extra rows in between these leg bobble stitches if you want your opossum to be a little bit longer. So you could have different sized opossums, maybe like have a mommy and then baby opossums if you want to use different sized yarn with them. I know that Premier has different variations of their Parfait Chunky yarn. So there's like an XL and then there's just the chunky. So you can have like a XL of an opossum to make a mommy opossum and then make the rest in the regular Parfait Chunky if you want some babies. So I think that's really cute. Overall in this pattern, I did see some consistency errors. So for example, at the start of each row, it shows a heart in the color of the color that you should be using in those rows. But in row 3, which is not the first row of white, it says in parentheses after the instructions for that row to crochet in white. However, there's already a heart in front of row 3 that has a white heart, so you know that you should already be crocheting in white. Another one of those consistency errors that I spotted was in row 5. It's a row where you do something repeated, so it's a single crochet and an increase, and you're supposed to repeat that instruction 6 times, but that is not in parentheses, so it just says single crochet, comma, increase, and then times 6. In a previous row, it had the repeat instructions in parentheses, which is pretty much the standard in crochet practices. So that's why that was a little bit confusing to me. The next consistency error that I saw was that the first time that you do a treble bobble stitch, it's shortened as treble BO, but then later in the same line and throughout the rest of the pattern, it says TBO, which is the shortening in the abbreviations section. I don't think that's necessary at all, especially since you have a abbreviation section that tells you what a treble bobble stitch is and what you're supposed to do. And so I would just recommend changing that to TBO throughout the whole pattern and not including it the first time. And then the final consistency error that I saw was that row 11 didn't have an ending stitch count, which is a little bit of a problem for me because I had an issue lining up my stitches in this pattern to make the correct amount of stitches multiple times. Specifically, I had issues in row 9 because I had 5 stitches left over, not 4. So in both times that I made this little opossum, I ended up adding a decrease in that row instead of having just 4 single crochets at the end, because I did end up having an extra stitch that I couldn't finish with because my stitch count would have been messed up. I don't know why I was having these issues. I recounted that row multiple times to make sure that the stitches that she has written there match up with how many should be there, and that wasn't an issue. So I'm not sure why that kept happening to me and why I kept having that issue. I had a similar problem in row 12. I'm not sure why mine comes out so wonky because the stitch count is correct in the pattern, but every time when I finished the row, I had 2 stitches left over, so I just ended up adding an extra decrease in that row to make it a little bit closer to the actual stitch count that it calls for. Some other things that I kind of got tripped up in the pattern about was that I didn't know if the first black bobbles were supposed to be ears or legs, so I waited until I got to the legs to place my safety eyes to make sure that they lined up correctly. I feel like once you make those first black bobbles, it should really tell you what they are, because the first time going around the pattern, you don't know that you're crocheting the ears directly into the rounds after the whole thing is finished, and that they're not bobble stitches. In row 11, I had to shift my bobble stitches a little to match up with the front legs. That might just be a tension issue. That's something that is really common to run into, so I don't fault that with the pattern designer. And then for the tail, it tells you to chain 13, but I thought that was a little long, so I ended up only chaining 6, so I have a shorter tail than it calls for, but I think it's like the perfect size for these little guys. I really want to give this pattern 4 stars out of 5, but I really can't, and the reason for that being is because I just had some issues with the stitch count not lining up properly, and I really have no idea why that's happening. I don't know if it's because of I have like a little bit of number dyslexia, so I don't know if I'm just counting that row wrong and there's actually an error in it and it doesn't have the right amount of stitches or what it is. But because of that, coming back to the pattern in the future, if I wanted to use it again, I would have to remember that every time that the row is not going to turn out how it's written to turn out. And I can see that being a little frustrating to me. So that is why I would have to give this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. It's still really cute. I love how they turn out. And that stitch count isn't like a huge problem, but I can see myself stumbling on that a lot. So that's why I'd give it that rating. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you give me a thumbs up and leave a comment down below if you have any recommendations for YouTube patterns you want me to review, or go over to Instagram and send your Instagram pattern suggestions to me over in my DMs, and I will keep track of those over there. I was so happy to have this many follower patterns available for me to review in one video. I was really just saving them up so that I would have a good amount to show in one video and dedicate one whole video about. And like I was saying, if any of you want any help rewriting your patterns or making them a little bit better, I would be happy to help you with that, any of the designers who were in this video. And I would also always be happy to help any of my followers who want help creating a pattern, if they want me to test it, get my advice, anything like that. So make sure you reach out to me if you want any of that help in the future as well. And if you enjoy my content and you want to see more in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and you can ring the bell notification button if you want to be notified every time I upload a new video. And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!